These poor children had no help. They were left alone to fend for themselves. I feel very blessed that she was spared. If you know somebody, a family member who's abusing their children or neglecting their children, you need to help them. You need to help these babies. These children need a voice. They don't deserve this.
If it was so bad, she would have left me, right?
I'll be better at managing my anger. Next time, I'll walk outside.
I can't believe I hit her again.
I can't believe I tried to kill him.
I'll change.
These are all the things people who are being abusive say to themselves. But no one, including you, has the right to hurt another person. Call 1-800-799-SAFE for help.
KSAT Community, in partnership with University Health, RBFCU, and Energy Transfer.
Thanks for joining us for this KSAT Community Child Abuse Town Hall. I'm Patty Santos.
And I'm Isis Romero. April is Child Abuse Awareness Month, an issue that has been a long-standing concern in the San Antonio area. But it is rarely an isolated issue. In today's town hall, we will hear from a panel of experts about the risk factors of child abuse, the generational impact, and how the community can help prevent it.
But before we introduce our panel, we want to put up a couple of resources, numbers to call to report abuse or neglect. And we will be putting these numbers on the screen throughout the live stream, but you can also find them on our website, ksat.com.
Now we want to introduce our panelists. Joining us from Providence Place is their Chief Program Officer, Angelica Cervantes. She has worked in social work for more than 12 years.
Angela White is the CEO of KSAT, a nonprofit that trains volunteers to advocate for children in the courtroom. Her experience is personal, having been in the system and adopted herself.
And last but not least, Bexar County Judge Peter Sakai. He has worked in juvenile and children's courts and is widely recognized as an important child advocate in our community. By the way, this is the second child abuse town hall here on KSAT. Judge Sakai joined us back in July of last year. Now, this was at the peak of the pandemic, as many worried that changes to our everyday lives might change the way child abuse and neglect was reported and handled in 2020.
Now, let's take a look back at some of the key takeaways from that very first town hall.
The numbers in Bexar County and the surrounding area are astonishing and scary.
The year 2019 saw more than 5,300 confirmed victims of child abuse and neglect in Bexar County alone. According to the Texas Department of Family Services, an overwhelming percentage of abuse allegations, 79% in fact, stem from this neglectful supervision.
It's basically exposing a child or children to substantial risk of harm, be it physical or emotional.
When you think about what things makes you concerned that a child is being abused, first and foremost, if the child tells you that someone is hurting them, hitting them, if you witness someone hurting a child, hitting, slapping with an object in the face. Sexual abuse is another form of abuse that sometimes there's not physical signs that you see, but it's more behavioral. Most often, the way that we find out about sexual abuse is from a child telling you that someone is hurting them. So when a child tells you that someone is doing something to them, again, listen to what they have to say, believe them, and make that report.
Talk to us about how COVID has made a difficult situation even more troubling for some of these children.
Our numbers show from CPS that the number of reportings have gone down. We know that the schools have basically closed down for now, and the schools have been a big reporting. We also know that our hospitals and our doctors, but I would think the reality is they're tied to the COVID-19 and those patients that are in urgent need of care. And so, again, the reporting has gone down.
In the state of Texas, every citizen is a mandated reporter. And I encourage everybody to, if you see something, say something. Anyone who has contact with children on a regular basis has the ability to make a giant difference in a child's life. Now is the time to reach out more to your neighbors, to your friends, to the people that you know and love, and make sure that they're okay and that their kids are okay. And it really is going to take this community working together so that the health of our children can thrive.
Now, we saw there some of the takeaways from the last town hall that we had in July, and today we really want to further that conversation. And I want to start with a question for the entire panel, Angela, Judge Sakai, and Angelica. And I want to give each of you an opportunity to respond to this first question. Looking at what happened during the pandemic, as we're coming out of this, in terms of child abuse, what did each of you see in your respective organizations? Did abuse increase because people were staying home, but then decrease in terms of reporting? Kind of paint that picture for us. And Angela, I'll start with you.
Well, what we've seen at KSAT is we have slightly less cases, but the cases that we're seeing are more severe. So the cases that would normally be picked up in a school or by a school nurse are at the point where a child is being taken to the hospital. So from the KSAT point of view, it's slightly less. It's not a lot less, frankly, but the cases are definitely more severe. So that's been our output of the coming towards the end of the pandemic and through the last year.
Judge Sakai?
I would echo what Angela White, our CASA CEO, has just said. We know that the rates of victimization, that number from 2019, is relatively static. We know that last year at our last town hall meeting, we saw a drop, and basically it hasn't really dropped. It's just basically been staying in a very static rate. Two ways to interpret that. Abuse and neglect hasn't skyrocketed up because of the COVID-19, or obviously, as what was pointed out at the last town hall meeting, there's less reporting. But as Angela White has pointed out, the cases are more severe in nature. The issues are more difficult and complex. And so those are the type of cases coming into the court. I will say, though, there is a statistic that I think is directly correlated, and that's our domestic violence, family violence rates. Those have increased. And obviously, people being kind of closed in and stay-at-home orders and not being able to move about, obviously, we have seen more domestic and family violence cases, especially since I am in charge of the Collaborative Commission on Domestic Violence. So we know that not all child abuse and neglect are as a result of domestic and family violence, but we know that domestic and family violence that have children involved, especially children who witness domestic violence, is abuse and neglect. And that is very disconcerting. I think that really falls in line with what Angela White has pointed out. These are cases that are more complex, more severe, and we have to be more vigilant to make sure that our children are safe and secure in our home.
Absolutely.
Angelica?
At Providence Place, we see the spectrum of children and families in different types of situations. I will say in our Parenting with a Purpose programming that we offer the services in the community for pregnant and parenting families. The year before the pandemic, that program had served unduplicated 2,000 individuals. In the pandemic, we reached close to 4,500 unduplicated individuals. So the need was significant, specifically during the first 3 months of the pandemic. We had a lot of families reaching out to us, just they had no food, the stress building up. We also have a program that provides services to adult women survivors of trafficking, domestic violence, and sexual assault. We did see increases in those referrals as well. But what we also saw was a lot of our women choosing to leave the program because of family members that were getting sick, additional family stresses, and that pulled them away from programming that was really focused on themselves. And those were some really difficult decisions that the women had to make about having to go back to certain circumstances because of the pandemic, because of lack of childcare, because of family members that were ill. people were in dire need of help, and our phones were ringing off the hook, which really pushed our staff to have to brainstorm ways to deliver services to our families in need in a safe way. So our team was out there doing curbside deliveries. We were literally doing therapy in driveways because we were getting so many people calling for help, feeling depressed, severe anxiety. And we also had a lot of families actually that did, because they also had the kids at home. They were stressed. They had so much on their plates. They had nobody to turn to. So a lot of the mental health services that we were offering, we really were learning just a lot of their stressors, and a lot of families, they were just tired. They're tired, and they were frustrated, and they were agitated, and they just felt really unsupported. So we really, at Providence Place, we saw firsthand the direct impact that the pandemic has had on our families and our community.
And Isis, as parents, we can definitely relate to the stressors. I cannot imagine what else when you add all the other issues that these families are having. I do want to pose a question to Angela. You mentioned that these were more severe cases. Can you dive in a little deeper into the types of abuse that you saw, and just, we always talk about this, but we really want to get a sense of just how serious this is. We're not just talking about statistics and numbers. These are children and these are families. Can you talk a little bit more about the types of severe cases that you saw?
I'm going to answer that slightly differently, if I may. We know that 80% of the children that suffer from child abuse are under probably 4 years of age, and they are under 3 feet high. And somebody actually said that to me in another meeting I was in, and it was a really physical representation of the impact to these small children that we're serving. We think children are bigger, but to paint you a picture, it's a 4-year-old child and under. That's the biggest populace that's impacted by this. And then what we've seen is, I say, hospital type of injuries, breaks of arms and legs or head injuries and things like that, rather than this child is bruised. This child looks like he's got too many bruises, or they've got too many bruises. He's seen the next stage of abuse because it's not being caught at the bruise stage. So when I talk about children being, the abuse side of that is one aspect. The neglect side is another. To reflect on what Angelica was saying, poverty, when people weren't working, the stress level that brings, also the food scarcity that brings for a family unit. It's such an entwined community problem that cannot be solved by just one of us. It needs Judge Takai's, it needs Angelica's, it needs everybody within the system that we work in to be looking for these children and looking out for them. And the cry from the child welfare space right now is see something, say something. Be wrong. If it's reported and you're wrong, hey, if it's reported and you're right, you may have saved a child's life. So don't let it get that far. It's like the judge said, if you're seen in his earlier piece, if you're seeing somebody behaving in a way that you would not treat your own child, think about that a little more. And it won't get to the stages of hospitals. It won't get to the stages of the death rates we've seen across the state of Texas in this year. So when I say it's abuse, it's breaks, it's harm, it's true damage to a child.
Absolutely. I want to talk really quickly about the situation happening at the children's shelter right now. We've all talked right now about the increase in cases and therefore the increase of resources and help that needs to be available to really combat and tackle this issue. Judge Takai, I want to ask you, can you explain to our viewers what exactly happened there at the children's shelter and then the impact of that moving forward?
Well, obviously, it is a very complicated, complex issue. Angela White has more information to share with us on this particular circumstance. But obviously, I want the public to understand that the children's shelter is a well-established, it's over 100 years old. It's got an excellent reputation, and it has been delegated authority and funding by the legislature. The legislature has made a decision to go to what's called community-based care, which has shifted the foster care system from CPS, who was totally in charge of funding and authority, to the program called Family Tapestry. Obviously, Tapestry had an assessment center called the Whataburger Center, for which they've closed and they've been cited for, and then they have a children's assessment center in which they place children before they go into our foster care system. And apparently CPS, namely especially the Austin headquarters, run by Commissioner Jamie Masters, has cited Children's Shelter for deficiencies and issues. I believe Children's Shelter has disputed and is contesting some of those findings. I am taking a position that I need the system to finish its investigation and to make its thorough report, and then we can make a decision as to what is happening. But I think the community, and I think I pointed this out to Patty in an earlier interview this week, there are other factors that are causing complications for our child welfare system in Bexar County. One, we have a federal lawsuit down in South Texas that basically has held CPS and found that the whole foster care system in the state of Texas is unconstitutionally flawed, at least from a funding perspective, and caseloads of caseworkers. That's the reason why I believe the legislature believed that going to a community-based care model might be a better way to do it. Obviously, people may have very different opinions on that. And so basically we have a federal judge that in the last year, especially during the COVID year, she has found CPS in contempt of court for failing to protect foster children. As a result, residential treatment centers throughout the state of Texas have closed. Children's Shelter has pointed out that 1,000 beds throughout the state of Texas have closed. And I will tell you, locally, we've had 2 treatment centers that took care of the kids that were at the Children's Shelter at this time, are high needs, behavioral challenge, children with significant mental health issues, especially older teenage children. The 2 places are the Hector Garza Residential Treatment Center and the George Gervin Youth Center. They have closed down. Their beds are no longer available. We also know that as a community, we have a lot of immigrant children that we are also taking care of. And so we have a tremendous stress on the foster care system, not only in San Antonio, but the state of Texas. And obviously, Children's Shelter isn't the only organization that has been cited by Child Protective Services. I will allow the system to finish its investigation, allow Children's Shelter to refute or dispute some of these findings. And then, but bottom line is that what we want to make the community understand is the issues were with a very relative small number of children that were at the Children's Shelter. As of last Friday, there were about 35 children, and they were ordered to be all moved out. Those were the children in crisis at that time. So I want the community to understand that overall, there are nearly 3,000 children that we have in foster care here in our region. This is the region. They're in safe and secure foster homes. So there is a plea to increase and have people step up to be foster parents. I'm making a plea to the legislature that we look at reimbursement rates and that we look to take away some of the bureaucracies and the rules and regulations as to why foster parents don't want to foster. And so we need to really look at it. So in a strange sort of way, I'm hoping this situation makes us a better system after we finish the investigation and come to our final conclusion.
Thank you, Judge Shakaya. I'm going to step in. As a judge mentioned earlier, I was actually listening to CEO of Children's Shelter, Annette Rodriguez, this morning, who, in my opinion, did an excellent job in her press release. CASA particularly, we had 26 children there when this happened. Most of those children are now placed in relative placements that happen very quickly. So the redistribution of the children happened very quickly, and we've seen some interesting things happen because it does beg the question, if you can do relative placements in 36 hours when it's an emergency, there is a way to do that. And we really need to look at that. I think, so back to Annette, just to give you some context if you didn't hear this, and this is straight from her conference, which is this morning. So Family Tapestry over the past 2 years have placed nearly 10,000 children. So let's be clear of context around what she's dealing with in this environment. there are many things that play into that, and that's 99%, by the way, of the children that were given to her was the context this morning. There are, to the judge's point, we have a capacity issue, we've had a COVID issue, we have children with high acuity needs and less beds, less funding when they're asking for more service and higher levels of care. It's a lot. It's a kind of perfect storm. And there is, I know Annette has requested that the emergency session happen. So Judge, you're probably aware of that at the legislative level. You know, funding needs to change. We need more beds. And we need to understand the size of this issue. And Judge, I know you mentioned the George Gervin Center. That's still open for federal beds. It's not open for beds for the state. And that's to do with funding and to do with the level of measures and care. Now, don't hear this as absolutely everybody on this call, children's shelter, CPS, we all want our children safe. Every single one of us. But there are, like Providence Place offers preventative services. KSAT, when you have a KSAT advocate, link the community to that child and figure out what that child needs. We need more of that. This is a jigsaw puzzle of child welfare care. And we need to work together with the community around us involved to look after the least of these children. And most of all, we need to work to get them home or with relatives. Judge Sakai, outstandingly, 49% reunification with relatives last year out of Bexar County. That's exceptional. And it is a gold standard of care. We cannot penalize people for the amount of money they earn and not having their child. And there is a true connection to poverty. We have to get better at this.
Now, moving the conversation forward, I know that back in July when we did the town hall, we talked about there was a decrease in the number of reports, but it seems like, you know, we're a little bit past the pandemic and it seems things are picking up. I'm curious to see if you have seen a change in that, and also if you can share some of the numbers that you have seen since the town hall. Did that change for you? And this can go to Judge Sakai.
Like I said, the numbers have stayed static. We basically have not seen a significant drop, nor have we seen a significant increase. The question is, has COVID-19 masked these numbers so that what's truly going on? And so I'm struck with Angelica Cervantes from Providence Place about the significant increase in referrals and how much. And so I want to applaud our nonprofits, such as Providence Place. They're one of the top-notch programs, along with many others. I don't want to leave people out because a judge forgot to mention us. So, you know, we have Family Service Association, we have Boysville, we have Roy Moss Youth Alternatives, we have
Battered Women Shelter.
There you go. And so bottom line is, and Angela White can tell me who I forgot, but bottom line is we want, and this probably is another segment toward the end where, what do we do? And I was struck with the numbers that Angelica Cervantes put out, because that tells me that there is diversion of parents to our nonprofits that are keeping them out of our foster care system, which does not have to create more beds for these children. So Angelica, I kind of want to go back to you and say, that's where we got to go. We have to stay, and this is one thing I want to make real clear now, and I'll make clear at the end of this town hall. We need to focus on prevention. We need to focus before things break down and the system has to put kids into foster care. If we were to work on that, and I am truly committed to change the paradigm, and that's why we need the community-based care model. Children's Shelter has given me their assurance that in their model, they're going to focus on prevention. And that's the way we're going to fix this on the long term.
Absolutely.
100%, Judge. And, you know, at Providence Place, the way that we address generational trauma is we understand the complexity behind it and the fact that you have to address it from all angles simultaneously. So our programming is all focused on prevention, intervention, and restoration all at the same time. And through our Parenting with a Purpose program, we actually work with a lot of families that are starting to come in contact with the system. So if a safety plan is in place, but because of our services and the families get what they need, the children get what they need, the support is there, things are closed out, you know, and families get what they need and they don't have to continue at all into the system. And that is exactly what we need. It's doable, 100%. But with partners, with collaboration, we need to stay focused on this united solution together as a community. Is what we need to do.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about domestic abuse as it relates to child abuse. And I want to play a clip from a conversation I had earlier this week with Marta Pelais. She is, as many of you know, the CEO of Family Violence Prevention Services. And Marta talked to me about the intersectionality of domestic abuse and child abuse. And I know, Judge Sakai, you talked a little bit about this in your opening remarks. And Marta said when domestic or partner violence is happening in the home, we need to think of children as not necessarily spectators, but they are directly impacted. I want to go ahead and play the clip of Marta as she really illustrates this for us. Take a listen.
Imagine the 80-year-old little boy that is perhaps half the size of the father and several times less the father's volume. He is in the presence of verbal abuse and physical abuse to his mommy. That is the most important human being in his life. And he feels absolutely impotent to do anything. He is terrified. He is shaking with fear. This is the very father that he has been socialized to respect, to be like, to emulate in every sense. And it's the person that is inflicting such horrific things to his mom. Imagine the dissonance at the cognitive level, and imagine the psychological and the emotional conflict that that creates in a little child. So this tremendous guilt that he has without intervention and proper treatment grows with the child, and it turns into tremendous rage and aggression later on in his life. That, in a nutshell, is the impact on a child.
So my question coming out of that clip we just played, and Angelica, I want to address this to you. During the pandemic, we saw perhaps the rise of child abuse cases, but also the rise of intimate partner violence and domestic abuse cases. Marta, they're saying you can't divorce the two. Then my question is this a challenge in terms of being able to identify abuse in homes when it's happening to children in perhaps a less direct way and not physical per se?
It's about being attuned, aware of the overall situation. And this is why it's so important for families to be connected to an array of services, people that are trained to do assessments, people that are trained to work with the family from a trauma-informed care perspective and know how to be able to identify flags and markers of that something might be off, additional assistance might be needed. Because when it comes to domestic violence, it is often hidden, 100%. Sometimes it can be very much masked under a lot of other circumstances that are occurring within the family. So you have to be really attuned when you're working and how you're assessing a family and their overall needs.
Angelica, if I may, I think you're absolutely right for one thing, but you know, we really have got to think about the impact of that young man then growing up and the cycle of violence, the cycle of generational harm. And we have to break it. I mean, the flip side of what Marta said, which was, I mean, I know her well, and that was heart-wrenching and beautifully said. You know, you have the little girl side of that, and then you talk about sexual abuse, and it doesn't only happen to girls, but, you know, and as she grows up, I phrase it as she's looking for love in all the wrong places. You know, and again, or she's looking for something to love that's just hers. And then you get to teen pregnancies. It's broken everywhere. Education of what is available in our community, education in the home, education in schools to children when they go to school about what's right in a home and what isn't, because that's normal for them. They think every house is like that. We have to get to the root cause and underneath these problems. And for me, again, it's the community playing all its part, and we have to address all children. In utero is a traumatizing place. You can suffer trauma in utero. And people think, oh, it's a baby, that's okay. It's not. It's still impactful. Dr. Bruce Perry, brilliant work on the brain and how the brain works. It's going to take us all to solve this.
100%. And also when we're working with our survivors, again, having that actual conversation about generational trauma. For a lot of our women in this situation, they're in survival mode. So oftentimes they're like, well, my child wasn't abused, or my child was just in the other room. They were nowhere near present or anything like that. And it's about educating the community and everybody involved. Like, there is an impact, and we see it when we have women arrive at our home. And after a few weeks, mom will actually tell us, you know what? My child actually slept for the first time. And that allows us to open up a conversation with her. Like, what does that mean? Your child actually slept. That is a sign of a sense of safety and security that child hasn't been able to have for for who knows how long. These simple things about rest, right? It's hard to rest when there's a lot of chaos in your environment, and it's a lot. It's a lot for our families to untangle, and it's about having those conversations in a compassionate way too, because we never want our families to be shamed. Our families are doing the best that they can with what they have, with also what they have known, and because of their own generational trauma too. And that has to be respected as well, right? As we all together kind of work to untangle all of these complexities as a whole.
Isis, I want to thank you for drawing that connection with domestic family violence to child abuse. That's something that people don't always grasp. And one thing I learned from Martha Pelias, and it's something I want this community to understand too, and that is, she has taught me throughout these years that action and behavior do not change unless there's a change in attitude and beliefs. That's why just simple parenting programs and anger management type classes sometimes are not effective, because you got to change culture, and you got to change attitudes, and you got to change beliefs. Unfortunately, we live in a community that sometimes thinks, that's the way I grew up, and it's okay, and it repeats itself. And then what Angelica Cervantes has pointed out, it's tied to trauma, and that's what Angela White just pointed out. And I will tell you, I'm proud of this community. We have the South Texas Trauma Institute that I believe Dr. Colleen Bridger over at the city of San Antonio has headed up. And so we're trauma-informed focused. You heard that Ms. Cervantes' program are trauma-informed and they're trauma-focused. Angela White knows as as a CEO of CASA, we have to focus on trauma. And so basically, I want this community to understand that we are ahead of the curve. We have some really great parenting programs. You just heard one from Providence Place. I can tell you, Children's Shelter runs one of the premier compadre fatherhood program. It's one of the best, I think, in the nation. We have the VENT program, which is another program. We have iParenting program that the Children's Shelter actually puts on. We have some really great programs that all are nonprofits, and they have become focused on trauma-informed care, and they have gone and basically be cutting edge on the type of therapeutic intervention program. And I think Angelica Cervantes, I think that makes a difference in our community, that we are changing beliefs, we're changing attitudes, and ultimately we're breaking cycles of abuse and neglect.
Last year, the state reported that there were 251 fatalities, child-involved fatalities, 13 of those here in Bexar County. Obviously, that's the worst outcome for a child in child abuse. Can you kind of walk us through some of the more milder forms that child abuse represents, that maybe people don't see it as child abuse, but it's still child abuse? Can you kind of talk a little bit about that? Maybe this is a question for you, Angela.
I will take the first piece, and then I'm going to send it to Angelica because I'm very aware of the program they have over at Providence Place, and she has women and children home together there. But it's the things like, even if you're in a supermarket, let's go into H-E-B and you're doing your shopping, and you see, a mother or father, whomever with a child, is like pulling the child along by their arm and making them hurry up. If they're doing that in public, what are they doing at home? It's been able to, it stems back to what Angelica said about looking for the signs, looking for the flags. There's abuse in shouting and yelling at children. There's mental cruelty. Telling a child, I grew up with an alcoholic mother, and telling a child, well, you should be grateful you're getting fed today. I mean, those things are cruel. There's a mental health cruelty there that impacts the rest of life for a child, or can do if they don't get the correct services. It's sometimes in the subtleties, just because, as the judge said, we grew up like that, potentially with a wooden spoon or the paddle, doesn't make it that's the way we should be doing it today. We grew up, if you were like me, not wearing a seatbelt in a car. We know better now. And we need to educate the community to know better about mental health and physical care for children. And sometimes it's not the family's fault. They simply don't know, which is why education for me is just so huge. And then, of course, you go, obviously, there's physical abuse, and it just gets further and further. But ignoring a child, if a child is crying out to you and wanting attention from you and you ignore them, that's a type of abuse. We've got to start having these conversations at a wider and bigger level, because I honestly believe that a lot of people simply do not know. But Angelica, I'm going to pitch it to you because I know you have women and children on site with you. And you can answer that as well, I'm sure.
So again, yes, when you think about child abuse, oftentimes the attention is just focused on the physicality piece. Does the child have, again, the broken bones or the bruises? And again, the really interesting thing with Providence Place is, again, we serve young adults, right? So we have adults that come in with their children, but then we also serve adult women all the way up into age 50, 60. So when we even look at their trauma history and we look at the type of abuse that they experience, it's really interesting to see, how the parallels between their childhood abuse and then the childhood abuse that we see with the current children that we're serving, in the sense of the level of emotional abuse that was endured. So thank you, Angela, for pointing that out, because I think that is so significant in there. When you're hearing children and you're hearing their caregivers, belittle them, using inappropriate verbiage with them. But again, it's so tied also again to that generational trauma. I'm going back to that because again, people tend to do things that they saw growing up, and they interact with people in the way that they interacted with others, and vice versa. But also looking at, oftentimes those kiddos that are quiet are the ones that are often all of a sudden just kind of deemed as, oh, they're the good child. We don't have to pay attention to them because they're so quiet and timid and things like that. That can be a sign, because when you think of a child developmentally, also depending on their age, if you have a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, it's not uncommon for them to be rambunctious, for them to be loud, for them to ask questions. Those are normal childhood behavioral developmental items that you see. So when you see, the intense quietness, the intense shyness, the intense kind of passiveness, those are some flags to just kind of be able to ask some further questions. Because oftentimes, the trauma that the child is enduring, specifically emotionally, manifests its way in very different forms. Lack of eating, if they're, constantly asking for permission to do things, but with fear, they won't do things without asking again. That's not overly common, because with children, it's okay for them to have some sense of impulsiveness, for them to want to just do things, for them to be autonomous and things like that. But when you see some of those behaviors starting to shut down, it does ask for just some further question and assessment. What's happening? What may be occurring? So again, those are just some other behaviors just to be mindful of. That the intense quietness, the intense being overly passive, and again the constantly asking for permission,
right?
Are some things to definitely keep in mind.
Thank you. And we've got about 20 minutes left in the town hall, and I want to be able to get on to some of the solutions and moving forward. But before we get there, I just want to point out that this live stream comes on a very difficult day in our community. Not only do we have what's happening with the children's shelter, but earlier today, the body of baby James, which is a story we have been following for months. His dead body was found, and his mother was arrested in connection with that disappearance. So when we look at some of the things that we're experiencing here in San Antonio and Bexar County, my question is for you, Judge Sakai, how does this community fare compared to other major metro areas in terms of the issue of child abuse? Is this, for some reason, more of a pervasive problem here than perhaps other large cities?
Thank you for that question, because that's where I wanted to go, because I wanted to give context in regards to the question Patty posed on child deaths. And obviously today is really, it's a sad day. We lost another child needlessly. But let me give context and numbers. We had 251 child deaths last year in the state of Texas. That's 251 too many. And we had 13 child deaths here in Bexar County, 13 too many. But let me give context. We have the height of child deaths in Bexar County was back in 2016, when we had double the amount, approximately. So we've been kind of on a downward trend. I will tell you, last year I looked at the numbers, we had 11, so it ticked up a couple, all right? And as far as statewide perspective, we are a third of the city of Houston in that area. We're half of the city of Dallas in that area. In fact, Fort Worth had more child deaths than Bexar County. And so at one time, Bexar County had the highest rates of removal. We had the highest rates of child deaths a few years ago. So I want to applaud, and I think it's a direct correlation to the nonprofits and to the community advocates and child advocates and KSAT and our medical professional law enforcement that get involved in the reporting of our citizens on these child deaths. The other context I want our community to understand, most of these child deaths did not have CPS involved. They were not basically on top of the CPS radar. We weren't involved. The courts weren't overseeing a family, and then we let the system fail. No, these were children, and obviously, and this is a hard statement to make, and I hope the public doesn't see it as insensitive. But some of our child deaths are criminal acts made by parents. And unfortunately, we can't prevent criminal acts. Just like we'd love to stop the shootings and the drive-bys and the homicides, you know, it takes a community effort on it, but it's complex. You just can't say, well, let's put a stop to it. And unfortunately, we have some child deaths that are just, they were never on the CPS. So it's very unfair to say CPS, you should have done something when they didn't even know about it. And so I wanted to give that context that I believe we have a very caring and committed community, and we should not discount the fact that, unfortunately, as in baby James in this situation, you know what? I really wish we could have had that child on the radar. Perhaps there could have been an early reporting, but we know that allegedly mom has some significant mental health issues. She has a criminal case. She's going to have to be prosecuted, and the system of justice will have to handle that case on the criminal justice side. It's just sad that the child welfare side couldn't have been involved earlier and prevented it. Perhaps that mom could have been over at the Providence place, and they could have then made the proper referrals in order for her issues and her mental health to be addressed. And that's why it is a community issue. We need a community commitment, and I hope this town hall meeting accomplishes.
Absolutely.
Now, earlier this week, I had a chance to talk to the head of Child Safe, who said the true impact of what this pandemic is doing on child abuse will really not be known until maybe a couple of years. Knowing that, how do we prepare as a community for those calls, those children who will finally maybe have a voice to say, this has happened to me? How do we prepare as a community? And that's for any one of you.
Sorry, Angelica, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we need to start also preparing the needed resources for families. Again, it's a systemic issue that involves a collaborative solution. So we need to start preparing resources on all angles, not just for the kiddos, but also for the families, checking in on families. Again, I need to highlight the importance of our community working also on destigmatizing asking for help. Because I know from Providence, us firsthand, a lot of the families that were reaching out to us could have probably reached out to us sooner, but they struggled with that because they associate asking for help with parenting as being a bad parent. You know, they associate with asking for mental health services as there's something wrong with me. I can't get the help because I'm going to be, you know, with the scarlet letter on me. And we have to be able as a community to normalize that asking for help is okay. Accepting help is okay. And we have all these support systems in place, and there's nothing wrong with utilizing them and putting them in play when it's needed. You know, because that's essential, because as we start identifying more and more situations, we need to be ready, and people also need to feel safe to accept those services and also be safe to engage with the community as they receive what they need.
And we want to give Angela and Judge Sakai another opportunity in case they want to add anything more.
I think Angelica's right. I'm going to quote Dr. Bruce Perry to you, who has the best question in the living universe, according to me. Is he doesn't ask, do you need help, or, you know, what do you need? He asks, what happened to you? Okay, it's a different question. And it releases guilt. That little boy that Marta was talking about that's carrying that guilt. If somebody asks him as he's an adult, what happened to you? It releases, it's a trauma-informed question to the bone. And we have to get that message out there. We behave as we do. It's emotions outside of the body is what behavior looks like. It is learned. It is, you know, the system we've grown up with. But then to ask for help, that vulnerability and courage, it's a courageous act. And that's the destigmatization that needs to happen. You know, if you can courageously go and ask for help, because you know there's something wrong in your home, you know your home isn't working well, and men are not the only perpetrators, let's be clear. You know, and that's even harder sometimes for them to ask for help. The question should be first and foremost, what happened to you? And ask yourself that question, and it may open a door for you to have the courage to reach out to the children's shelter programs, Providence Places programs, Alpha Home, where I used to work, their programs. We're there. We're here in this community for you. We don't exist for no reason. We exist because people need us. Ask yourself the question and then reach out for help. I support you, Angelica, 100% in what you said.
And I'll just repeat what I said earlier: prevention, prevention, prevention.
Yes,
and
sir.
Basically, also to Patty and Isis, I want to thank KSAT TV for this town hall meeting, because this is what we need. We need to educate our community. They need to hear context and background. They need to understand the referral sources and the programs such as Providence Place and all the other programs that I've mentioned and failed to mention. So for those that are said, Judge, you forgot me, I'm sorry. It just, you know, we have a great network, and what we need to do as a community, we need to be connected, and we need to basically have a ability to help our most vulnerable, and we need to help those families. And, you know, sometimes it's easy to stand in judgment and go, well, they don't need help, or, you know, they don't want to help. But no, we just need to be proactive. We need to get on the prevention side. And I think Providence Place, at least what I learned today, they're making a significant impact in our community. And I think they're diverting a lot of parents from our foster care system, which would avoid having to find beds and placement for foster care children. And so thank you, KSAT TV.
Absolutely. And as we kind of shift the conversation to talk about education and take some viewer questions about what they can do, I want to first talk a little bit about legislation, and I want to play a soundbite from Representative Ina Minjares, who I interviewed on Monday. And she talks about two House bills that she's authored that have now passed the House. They're in the Senate right now. Both bills, HB 135 and 682, deal with the investigative process when someone is accused of abuse. One bill deals with giving parents the right to be told about administrative reviews, and the other deals with parents having the right to record an investigative interview. I want to play really quickly that soundbite from Representative Menjadas about why she feels these bills are important, and then we'll talk about it on the other side.
Legislatively, the Senate and the House agree that there needs to be an overview in terms of how families are treated by the department when the investigative process starts. There is a lot of research and data out there, again, that shows that there has been an increase in the amount of unnecessary removals. And what do we do to preserve the family? What do we do to give them the resources? And again, it may be maybe because they're poor. It could be other reasons that don't justify breaking up a family. However, we also need to consider the fact that there are children that do need to be removed for their safety. You know, there is a percentage of children that die, right, as a result of abuse and neglect, and we can't ignore that. So again, this is a complex issue. But luckily we're understanding the need, and this is why I always try to focus on different pieces of legislation every session.
And so she's saying there that these House bills are due to the need because there's a high rate of unnecessary removals. And I wanted to address this because we had a couple of viewer questions pertaining to this. One person asks, on the one hand, why does the Department of Family Protective Services place children back in abusive households? And then on the other side of that, we had a viewer question come in asking, why is it easy to report false allegations, but then hard to prove you're innocent? And so my question is to you, Judge Sakai, are you seeing a high rate of cases of abuse or neglect being overturned, and can you kind of contextualize this for us?
Well, the short answer is no. You know, most of the cases come in with significant history and significant risk and safety to the children. I mean, I understand there could be a case where, you know, CPS just got it flat out wrong. They investigated a case. And I respect Representative Menjadas because I applaud her because she did children's court work as a private attorney, doing ad litem work. In other words, court-appointed work in our children's court. So she has firsthand knowledge of our child protective service system. I will tell you, as a way of context, every time we demand CPS to protect, especially as of today, why didn't CPS protect baby James? And there are going to be people in this community who are going to point the finger at CPS. And CPS is a natural reaction. It's going to go, okay, fine. We're just going to be extra careful, and we may be removing children that could have been referred over to Providence Place for services. And they could have provided the wraparound services that Children's Shelter, Family Service Association, Alpha Home, and all the other facilities that have parenting programs, they could safely keep these children. But what then becomes circular is then we put them in a foster care system, and that earlier about, well, why are they being returned home? We don't have enough beds. And you heard Angela White say that basically a lot of children that were in that children assessment center that were ordered out are being returned at the very least to the relative placement, and perhaps some to the parents. And I understand that is a difficult situation for the public to sometimes understand. Why should we do that? But I'm convinced that we have a foster care system in crisis. We have to try to keep families intact. And I really have, especially with my family drug court and early childhood court, my baby court, we've been very successful at reunifying children with their parents in safe, secure homes. And obviously parents need to become clean and sober. They need access to their mental health, and they got to break these cycles of family domestic violence. And so ISIS, yeah, it's complicated, and then we have conflicting pressures on the system. Why aren't you doing more? Or, whoa, you're going way too far, and you're really violating people's rights. And so occasionally we do hear cases where, you know, we did not probably need to remove, but the families are in need. And so that's why the nonprofit communities need to step up. And this community needs to step up. It's not just foster care beds and foster parent. It is, we need to support our nonprofits. And so it's either time, treasures, or talents. We need to make sure our nonprofits, especially in COVID time, they're funded and they've got the ability to provide the services, and we need to increase the capacity for which they serve our community and they serve our community well.
And Judge, if I may for a second, that's what CASA does. So the judge will say the parents, the children may be removed. CASA works alongside the child for the child's needs and voice, but simultaneously are working alongside either the foster parent, the placement, the parents, bio parents, relatives, to make sure that if the child does go back home, it is safe, to make sure those services have been happening for the family. So, and the gold standard of care is to put a child back in its family of origin, whether that's relative or mom and dad. People recover. There are thousands, millions of people out there in recovery from drugs and alcohol. Okay? They're able to raise their children. Again, it's education, it's services, it's knowing what to do right, and it's having somebody, in our case, like a CASA, to work alongside that family and make sure that that child is going back to a safe place, and support CPS and support Children's Shelter, support the Judge Courts, Providence Place, all of them. It's a village, and it's an army that we need.
And Angela, as we start to wrap up our conversation, it's just incredible how fast an hour goes when you're talking about this. But in tune with what you just said, one of the viewer questions was, how can I become involved in comforting children in the children's shelter or assigned homes, or even become a foster parent? Can you go a little bit more in detail, and also some of the resources that we'll obviously post on KSAT.com to further this conversation? But can you just talk about how people can get involved with this problem?
Reach out to what moves your heart. If you want to be a foster parent, speak to Children's Shelter. If you want to do volunteer advocacy, speak to me. If you want to do services and volunteer at the beautiful place that they have over at Providence Place, call Providence Place. I am very focused at the moment at CASA. If somebody comes to me and wants to volunteer, and we're not a fit for them for whatever reason, to refer them to another place where they can be a fit. And I would love other nonprofits to be doing that. Some do. But I would love us to be more connected at that level, because if somebody has a heart to serve, just because CASA's not a right fit doesn't mean I don't point them in another direction. We have to do our part with this community. If you want to do something, just make the ask. There's lots of things. There's volunteers for a daily piece. Come and cut the grass at Providence Place, for example. I'm sure that's not true, Angelica. I'm making it up, but there's, you could come and help here with the children. Come and read to the kids if you've got all the backgrounds in place. There's just so much. If everybody did something, it would make such a huge difference. The biggest request from me is, if you see a child, you even have an inkling, that feels weird to me, report it. If you're wrong, you're wrong. That's okay. But if you're right, it's going to make all the difference. That's the first thing. And then find where your heart drives you.
I will say for Providence Place, we do foster placement. So we work alongside Family Tapestry for placement. So we're always in need of foster parents. And we are also all about educating families to make sure that families are also well educated regarding what is needed to be a foster family for a kiddo in need, what it's like to be able to, work with a kiddo that has a history of trauma, because we want to make sure our families are prepared. Our children deserve the best homes, and they deserve families that are 100% invested. So at Providence Place, we really do spend a lot of time with families, really educating them on, realistically what is entailed in the foster care process and how to become a licensed foster parent. So if you're interested and you're wanting to learn more, please reach out to us as well. We're always more than happy to kind of take you through the logistics and what it involves, the training, and the level of investment that's really needed, so we can make sure that we're offering the best that we can for our kiddos.
And Judge Sakai, what about you? How can the public play a more active role, Judge, before we wrap it up?
Angela White and Angelica Cervantes have said it all. Obviously, I'd love to be put out of business. I would love to see that we don't have any abuse and neglect, and we don't need more courts, and we don't need more prosecutors, and we don't need more lawyers trying to intervene into people's lives. That's my 2 cents for today.
And we just want to thank our panelists so much for your time, for your expertise, and for your insight. This was a wonderful conversation. And we want to pop up that graphic one more time before we say goodbye with the number to call if you suspect child abuse in our community. There are resources available, as we learned throughout this town hall, and so please, our plea to the public today as we wrap up Child Abuse Awareness Month, and not just this month, but moving forward as a whole, this is something to certainly keep in mind. 1-800-252-5400 is the number to call. To our panelists, thank you so much for your time and for joining us today. That is all our time for now. To all of our viewers, thank you so much for watching and for being part of this important conversation. If you missed any part of our conversation, you'd like to catch up on what we talked about, you can find this town hall on our website, www.ksat.com, or on your KSAT TV app.
All right, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.